Welcome back to more coverage here at the Developer Innovation Day. I'm A.M. Grabelli, Developer Advocate here at AWS, joined as always by
Farrah Campbell, the head of Modern Compute Community, and we have now with us...
Hi, I'm Brooke Jamison. I'm a Senior Developer Advocate with AWS.
Very nice. Now, have you ever wanted a best friend?
Always.
Yeah, I don't have any.
Same.
So, I'm just kidding. You're my best friend.
I was gonna say.
Of course, Farrah. Of course. Come on. I'm playing up the drama, you know? Like, we got to tell a story here.
That's what they want, you know?
Have you ever wanted a best friend who could write all your code for you? That's where I was going.
Even more, yeah.
Yeah. And that's what you're here to tell us about, right, Brooke?
Yes. You can be your own best friend is the moral of the story today.
Or have a cat as your best friend.
Yeah, and they can also help you with your code. If anyone would like to know what I'm referencing, I did actually make a video that's pinned on my Twitter, I believe, of my cat using Amazon Code Whisperer to automatically generate code. So if the cat can do it, anyone can.
Finally, I could put my cat to work. Like that's
seriously.
They don't even.
He's just laying around all the time.
Yeah, same.
He doesn't even pay rent. You know?
No rent, nothing. Really, just like takes a lot of resources from me.
Right. So it's time to give back, and through the magic of Amazon Code Whisperer, that is possible.
Okay.
I'm excited to hear about it.
We're off to a great start, everyone.
Yes.
So this is how you can build applications faster and more securely with your AI coding companion, or CAT. So, as we know, development is hard. Water is wet. But this really has changed as crafting reliable and secure code has become more challenging for organizations. As always, every developer I know wants to have more focused time, and that focused time seems to be slipping away from all of us. So there's just lots of undifferentiated code that you're spending time making, things like unit testing, and even maybe end up using source code inappropriately if people are just copy-pasting from a forum of their choice. And all of this means that just everything is harder. It's also, there's so much to keep up with. As you've seen today, there are so many new technologies that we've just talked about today, but this always is changing. Even if you understand a programming language, there's a new framework to apply that with. So everything gets more challenging. And then the application security is getting more challenging with this over time. So development is hard, but this has been able to be changed because modern teams are using AI to get more done and faster. We always hear people saying, do more with less lately, and that's a really good reason. So developers, as we talked about, have been buried in manual coding tasks and lots of endless research and hand coding before. But now this is changing. So as you can see in the middle chart there, the number of parameters used in models has really increased. I think the numbers on this are 1,600x from 330 million up to 540 billion.
That's no big deal.
I'm sure someone will let me know in the comments if that's the wrong calculation. But the important thing is that the number of parameters in these really large models has increased so much. And this is really thanks to enhancements in compute as well as enhancements in the amount and types of data that have gone into these models. So this is what has led to the creation of Amazon Code Whisperer, which is a real-time AI coding companion from AWS. And as a side note to this, if you are a data scientist or very interested in the data science of this happening, there's a really good article on Amazon Science, which is the research department of Amazon, from the data scientists who built the product. So if you would like to dig into this slide, never fear, there is so much more information out there. The next piece of the puzzle, so this is how you can build applications quickly with your AI coding companion. If you have seen Amazon Code Whisperer before, you would have noticed that it was in preview until up about 2 weeks ago. So if you used it in the preview, some of these icons will be different. There was actually 10 extra languages launched as part of the general availability launch 2 weeks ago, including Rust, Kotlin, and a number of others. But always there was Python, C#, C, and JavaScript, TypeScript, and Java. Additionally, so you can use this across VS Code, also the IntelliJ family of IDEs. I love calling them a family. You can also use it natively in AWS Cloud 9, which is AWS IDE. Also, you can use it within the Lambda console, which I'm sure Farrah knows all about.
I call it SQL there too. I mean, that's pretty incredible. I don't know if I've struggled more in my career writing SQL statements than anything else.
Yeah, I feel like I'm solving riddles every time.
Yeah.
Logically, I know what to do and I can draw a picture of what I want to do, but then I feel like I'm on this puzzle-solving journey every time. So it's really helpful to have some help here. Especially, there's always so many different things in Lambda functions that I Google every single time I have to do it because I know that I know the answer, but I can never actually remember it when I need to. And I end up just having to open a new tab and Google something. And this is really like this context switching is what Code Whisperer really helps with because you're not having to have a million tabs open. You can just work with one pane in your IDE, which for a lot of people is just a much more calm way to code because you can get into that deep work and focus time a lot easier without having to get sidetracked on a couple side quests. Maybe it's just me that ends up with side quests.
Oh no, anytime I step away from anything I'm doing, if I start looking at anything, something else is going to pop up. And then I'm like, where was I at?
Where am I? What day is it? Who knows?
Who am I?
Right. And so this is how your coding sidekick or your cat will work. So you could be writing code directly in the IDE, and the IDE context will automatically send to Code Whisperer. So this includes the code that you're writing, as well as English language, natural language comments in your code. It will also take into account the information from other pieces of code that you have open in your IDE. So especially if you're working something like Amazon Glue, AWS Glue, you've got to have a few tabs open at a time to be doing this, but the good news is it will take the context from all of those to give you a good example and really get the most out of what you're trying to show. It even takes into account where your cursor is on the page, which I found super interesting. And all of this is used to then make your real-time code suggestions. So what's going to happen is when you're using Amazon Code Whisperer, which we will show you in a quick demo later on. The real-time code suggestions will pop up. You use the arrow keys to flick between them until you find something that you like. And then to lock it in, you just press the tab key, which is why I made a video with a tabby cat, pressing the tab key so that everyone, including myself, would remember that that's the key that you need to press. It's great. Additionally, there's some other features that are unsung heroes of the product. So the reference tracker. So Amazon Code Whisperer was trained on Amazon source code, but as well as open source code. So if it notices that a recommendation it's giving you is one of the pieces of open source code, it will then reference that and then add the licensing. I'll go through an example that uses the MIT licensing and adds this to the reference tracker, which is really, really good, especially if you're using the enterprise version of the software. So this gets all logged together in the reference tracker. There's an example of this. Additionally, it does security scanning, which is super interesting. So the number of security scans you get is lower on the individual tier, but the enterprise tier that was added, if general availability is more, I believe it's 50 on individual and 500 on the professional tier. And this really will go through and check lots of key security failures. So are you hard coding things that shouldn't be hard coded? Are you making silly mistakes that will lead to a very big bad problem later on? Could you have just fixed it
The answer is
in
yes,
the first place?
for
Yeah.
me.
Gosh, I can't imagine how much time that saves being able to catch errors early before you deploy them and then it gets found later.
Or never are found.
Or, yeah.
Especially if you're working with a big team, it's just making sure that everyone's on board. And I certainly am known to make silly mistakes often. It's my favorite thing about being a developer. So it's like, yeah, having a sidekick that will save you from yourself in a number of ways. And then so that's how you're going to get the code suggestions that you'll then use in your IDE. And like I said, we'll go through this in a demo in just a momento. Speaking of which, fantastic news, it's time for a demo, everyone.
Hey, we love demos.
I mean, same. So first things first, this is the Code Whisperer. And what we're going to do is going into the, does this play? No, I need to go back now. How do I play the video? If I press again, will it go? Is something happening?
There's no way of knowing.
There's no way of knowing. So what will be happening soon is we're going to be opening VS Code, which is my IDE of choice. If you're watching from home or on the go, please comment and let us know what your favorite IDE is, or even what themes you're using in your IDE.
Oh, wow. What a contentious question.
Because I love starting drama in the comments.
Yeah,
So-
apparently you do. VS Code, by the way.
Yeah.
What's yours?
That's why I said VS Code, which is what we will eventually be using in the demo. Yeah, but as well,
Do you
it
have a
started.
favorite
Yes, the
IDE?
demo has started. Fantastic.
Oh,
We're
great.
using VS Code.
This one?
So now I'm
This
showing
one.
you how to get started. It's just in this sidebar over here. What we're going to be doing is showing you how to log in with your AWS Builder profile. If you don't have an AWS Builder profile, a Builder ID, this is what you'll need to use for this, as well as Code Catalyst, which you would have seen earlier in the program, I imagine.
We did.
So
We did.
make a profile, and then you can just connect it up through your IDE of choice. That's how I got that going. So the first example, we're going to start with Python, and we're going to define a function to upload a file to an S3 bucket, which is something that I Google every time I do. Even though I know how to do this, I still Google this every time. So this is an example of how it's going to be working. So we've added our import statements, and now we're just adding some natural language comments to say what we want to be doing in an ideal world. So we're saying we want to define a function to upload a file to an S3 bucket. Now, as you can see, it's starting to give me some information, but I didn't really like it, so I went back. This is also showing you that if you don't like something, you should and could just delete it. It's not locked in forever, even if you take the suggestion. Sometimes even, so it can do entire blocks of code as it's showing here, or you can have, so it can be like up to 10 to 15 lines, or you can have just the next line made for you. So it really is showing you how you can work with it. As always with all of these examples, if you're not happy with what's coming out, you can absolutely, and you should absolutely check and edit what you're doing. But also if it's not giving you what you need, keep adding some extra lines of code or some comments to give it that extra information. As you can see, this is now adding what I need to. And if I add this, it's actually going to add the logging module, because it's going to add some logging for us to show if it's not uploading the file correctly, which I didn't even think to do when I was setting my import statements. But now it's doing that for us, the sidekick I always needed. So now, as you can see, it's added that logging statement, and we've got a complete function that's ready to roll. So easy, even a cat could do it, you know?
And you have a new best friend.
Right, yeah. Out of you both, which one do you think would be the coder, and which one do you think would be the code whisperer? Do you think if one of you was doing the code and one of you was whispering the code, which one do you think that would be?
I've never been accused of whispering anything in my life.
Right,
If
so,
anything,
yeah.
I scream too much.
I mean,
Farrah
you see
would
like the jump, like, right?
Yeah,
You know?
I scare Farrah every time we go live. So I can't be the code whisperer. I probably can't be the coder either.
Well,
so.
Farrah would be a very, like, a learned and really devoted companion to have when coding. She's very talented, so it's probably a very good
Yes.
choice. Now we're working with Java, so we're importing some functions as well. For this, we're going to work between JSON and XML. Once again, something I know how to do, and yet check every single time I do it. So we've got some imported required classes and packages happening at the top. And now we're looking at defining the JSON to XML class. Is everyone keeping up with us? And then I'm adding some extra information. You'll notice, as I'm saying, it's when I'm filtering through with my arrow keys, it's giving me different information. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't like it, but this will come into play. And see, now it's given me an example. One key piece here is, like I said, it's taking into account all of the code that you had open in the IDE. So it's one thing that's a little bit funny for demos, because I'm just trying to force it to show me examples of this in specific languages. I'm not actually using this for development in the way you would in the wild when you were actually using this. So that's a really good example if you're trying to replicate this and it's not giving you the same outcome. That's why, because that means it's working correctly, because it's taking into account every single thing that every piece of information and context that you've given it. So it's one of those things that if you start using it, you'll notice when you're using your tabs and everything, as you would when you're actually developing, not when you're trying to force a demo, it will give you much more intuitive answers. So as you can see, I'm trying to force it to do this, but I'm also really, being mindful of what I'm importing and what I'm not importing when I'm using this JSON to XML method to get the result that I want with the Java code.
I was going to ask, it sounds like, number one, it can remember things in longer than 5-minute intervals, like some people, or unlike some people. But I was going to ask, are there certain ways of, like, fine-tuning, when you're working with Code Whisperer, the natural language stuff that you're feeding it?
Yeah, so one of the FAQs on the actual product page is like, how can I get the best results from it? The first one is to give it really short statements that it can work with. So don't try and do 50 million things with one comment line. Write a comment line that's like, so in the last example when we were saying, upload file to an X3 bucket. That's something it can do in one step with one block of code. So if you do that in sort of like separate sections, you'll get much better results from it. Additionally, things like it will infer the names of variables and things that you're using. But if you use intuitive variable names, that actually does help as well, which also is just good practice if you're working out in the field, especially if you're in a team.
Not var A or var B.
Yeah, so it's something that will just like help keep you on track. So anything that would help you be a good team member also is going to help you with this when you're working with your coding companion of Code Whisperer. In this example, it's JavaScript. So we're going to work with a React component that renders a list of products and their corresponding prices in HTML div elements. So now we're just importing some required elements and modules here. So the React library, always a great start when we're working with React. And then further down, we're going to define the data. My favorite part of this is I am putting in some an array of strings for products, and it even guesses that I'm going to do fruits. I don't know how it could tell that I was going to do fruits, but here we are. It even knew. As an act of defiance, I changed one of the fruits at the end because I was just,
Don't tell me what I want.
It knew exactly what I wanted, which even though that's what it was designed to do, I still found quite stressful. But this is great because it was really showing that it could tell what I was going to do. And even if you're doing a different array of strings that was for something else, this is still a really intuitive way to start that you can give it the information that you needed. It then also gave me almost exactly the prices that I wanted as well, which once again I changed out of defiance.
For the bananas, if you had left it, it would have polled, obviously, Lucille Bluth to ask how much a banana costs, which is, as we all know, $10.
Are you going to do the voice for this?
What does it cost, Michael? $10.
Perfect. Perfect. I loved that.
That's why they have me up here. It's the only reason. Just Lucille.
Lucille. So letting you know, Lucille, we're now just defining the render products function, which will take two parameters, the ones that we already set, so products and prices. So now we want to return an array of React elements that are going to represent the product and price, and then we're going to use a map method to iterate over those arguments to get those in div elements. This is really interesting because it does, when you go through this in practice, give you so many different ways you can do this, which obviously there's so many different ways in React you can do anything. So it's really a matter of saying which one did you specifically want. I had a really clear idea in mind of the H1, H2 formatting that I wanted for the key attributes, so I just kept going until I could get it. But it's a really good example of if you want to be very stubborn, you absolutely can. If you want to be very specific and particular about what you want, you absolutely can. But otherwise, it will just give you lots of different options. And like I said earlier, you just use your arrow keys to go between them. And just if you've gone past one, you can go back with the arrow keys as well if you thought it was better in the first place, which was very reassuring to me as someone that's incredibly indecisive. This is an example of the reference tracker that I was talking about earlier. So it's going to, I'm concocting a reason that it would need to give me an MIT license reference in this. So what we're actually going to be doing is retrieving a URL from an Amazon DynamoDB table based on a given ID, and then we're going to try, it's actually what would be a Lambda function. So it's going to return an HTTP response with the URL or an error message if the URL is not found. So we've imported some required modules and type hints. I even include typing, but we actually don't really need that in this element of code, but it's a good example of even if you give it too much information or wrong information, it still will do what you need it to do, which is helpful. And then you can always go back and add things, and it's just all the context will help. So now we're working on defining that get URL function. The parameters for this will be event and context. And as you can see there, it's given you the little pop-up saying that this has a license, and that's going to go down in the reference tracker, which just popped up at the bottom of the screen. So that's how you can keep track of that. I'm just like deleted it, redid it to show that it's still there. Fantastic. And that's giving you attribution of where that open source code element was found.
That's really cool. So is this only for developers that are building on top of AWS?
So the thing is the model was trained on Amazon code and open source code. So it can do a lot of things. You don't need to be doing AWS things. But the thing is especially working with lots of the SDKs that you would have seen today, having a really good understanding of the AWS APIs is something that really takes off a lot of the overhead for developers. So obviously at AWS, we're going to build something that's great for AWS, and it really understands the nuances and eccentricities of all of these APIs. So if you're using them at all, it's a really good way of getting involved with that. But obviously, you don't need to be using that element to be using Code Whisperer, if that makes sense. But yeah, obviously, if you're working in the Lambda console, it's so helpful because it's just like this is the baseline of what Lambda should be doing for everyone, and it's just taking a lot of that overhead away. So now we're just finishing off the function, and it's still guessing what I need to do. Super helpful. So it's also a good example. It gave me that really big block earlier, and then I'm just finishing it off to get the very specific return responses that I wanted from it, and I was even flicking through getting different options for those return responses.
Got a question from chat around tuning to an individual, developer's coding practices. Does it learn as you code with it?
Yeah, I think people will definitely get used to it over time. I found it a bit, when I was first using it, I wasn't ready for it to be so helpful. So I think it's definitely, I had to learn to work with it at the start, but then now it's so ingrained. It's like doing anything for the first time. It always feels a little bit weird. But you can definitely learn from each other. And I noticed that I was leaving much better comments. Because when I'm just coding for myself, not at work, I am the worst team player. Like, I am not on Team Brook when I'm coding for myself, and I was just not leaving comments and things. But it really forced me to be really specific in what I was putting in those comments, which made me learn from it. But then also it had so much more context to be pulling from with those comments, which was super helpful. It's teaching me to be a better team player with myself, which is something we can all aspire to.
Well, your cat's probably happy about it.
Yeah. My ultimate pet programmer, or per programmer, someone said on Twitter. So good, so good. For more dad jokes, sign up. No, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, this is why you should. But first of all, this is a QR code, firstly, to sign up for individual developers. You don't need an AWS account. The next one is a workshop. So if you really want to see how you can use it in action while also going through a workshop and actually building, which we love to see on Developer Innovation Day, that middle QR code is for you. And the final one is a YouTube video stepping you through start to finish how you can build an event-driven serverless app, which I know Farah will be very excited about.
I know, I'm like, I got to check this one out.
We also had a question about working offline. Can you use Code Whisperer offline?
I am never offline, so
Yeah.
I have never tried because I remain perpetually online and I will never log off.
Yeah, same. Even on PTO, online. Anyway, much like Code Whisperer, I too like short, succinct instructions. So remember that when you're working with Code Whisperer.
Something we can all aspire to. Yeah, and just be really specific. Give it all the context that you can, and it will get better. And then also, even if you like half of a big code block, you can just get it and change parts. And then once you've changed that part, it will inform any future updates as well. So it's really just training it, which I think some people will notice the way that they name variables. Maybe that's different to what it's giving you first of all, but then it'll really start to just gel in with that.
Definitely, yeah. And I loved the suggestion too around like, I live in a lot of AWS SDKs, and I've been living there for a long time, but I literally have to have the documentation up because I don't remember anything.
It's a nice neighborhood to live in.
To the next day. But with Code Whisperer, you don't have to go look at the docs necessarily all the time. It's generating it for you. That's great.
Yeah, I love just having one piece. I don't even use monitors when I'm coding. I love just having one screen up, and it really does help me to do that and be a better developer at the same time.
For sure. Brooke, thank you for joining us. Amazing.
Thank
Amazing.
you for having me. I
And
can't wait to see what everyone builds.
You gave me a way to generate some income from my cat, so I'm forever indebted to you.
Perfect.
All right. Farah, we've got a community session coming up. Do you want to introduce
Yes,
it?
we're going to hear from Brian Tarbo. Super excited. And if you ever run into him, he might ask you to speak at the Boston user group.
That happened to me.
That's the first thing he says to everybody. I love it.
Yeah.
All right. So we will be right back with more. Stay tuned for Brian.